What's going on, everybody? Kevin Sullivan from XTIUM here with the next series of our on-demand webinars. So really excited for today's conversation. We're going to be having a discussion specifically around managed security offerings, and we brought in some great panelists to take part in this managed security panel with us today. So rather than having me introduce them, I'll let everybody kind of go through and in their own words, give a little bit about who they are, where they're coming from, and what they do in the security space. And if you're okay with it, Matt, I will begin with you.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having us on. So my name is Matt Moore. I'm currently with Ticura. Ticura is a company that specializes in threat intelligence curation, hence the name Ticura. So that's kind of what we do. My background is I've been in the cyberspace since the late 90s, systems integration, outsourcing, security outsourcing, and most recently running managed security services. So I'm kind of a delivery guy, client facing. And at Ticura, I'm responsible kind of for our client sat, client engagement, pre-sales, post-sales. It's a young company, so I wear a lot of hats, but I'm really happy to be here. Pat, you want to introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
thank you, Matt. Pat Jamison. I'm a senior sales director with ControlCase. We're a company that's headquartered out of Fairfax, Virginia. We've been around since 2004. We're basically a leading provider of basically compliance as a service, where we really can help with offering services and solutions for IT governance around risk management, compliance, and really just helping organizations meet various regulatory standards that are quite complicated at times. So that's why we're happy to be here to help talk through some of that side of the cybersecurity things, because they go hand in hand. So working in the space for 7+ years, doing a lot of work with small, medium, enterprise level organizations throughout my career with respect to cybersecurity. And we're very much excited to be a part of the discussion today. So thank you. I'll kick it over to Aaron.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Aaron Walton. I'm Senior Threat Intel Analyst at Expel. Uh, Expel is a managed detection response provider. We function a lot like a SOC for a lot of our customers, where we're actively working with their security team. We're monitoring alerts from all of their tech. We integrate with as many things as we can. We're up to like 120 integrations. Part of my role is paying attention to the threats that target our customers and target our organization and ensure that we're ahead of those. In regards to my own background, I've been in security for about the last 6 years. I've changed careers a few times, originally studying anthropology and then working in regulatory compliance for the aviation industry, which has brought some interesting perspectives to be able to look at threat actors and think about how they bring risk to our organizations and how to think about that risk.
Awesome. No, thank you, each of you. Really, excuse me. Looking forward to today's conversation because I think we get a really nice mix of perspectives here, right? So we certainly have, with the MDR expertise, Aaron on the Expel side, Matt coming in with the threat intelligence background. That I feel like those two things really complement one another exceptionally well, and then Pat coming in over the top with the compliance piece because I feel, and maybe this can be one of our first topics for conversation today. I feel that here in 2025, even though both of these things have been around for a long time, it still feels like there are a lot of customers out there or a lot of prospects out there that tend to view security and compliance as the same thing. I don't want to answer on all of your behalf. I feel like each of us would probably say they're not, right? They're interrelated, but maybe let's talk about that a little bit of, what do you envision as the differentiation and maybe some of the overlap between security and compliance? And if you're okay with it, Pat, we'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about cybersecurity and with respect to compliance, they do often get conflated into two different things that oftentimes reality-wise are really one and the same. I think that when you look at the way in which they're, providing that we contextualize it, cybersecurity, I look at it as almost a motion that doesn't necessarily have a defined characteristic per se, because the cybersecurity landscape is such that, unfortunately, threat actors are quite good at their jobs, and we got to be better than them. And so the old adage of, you build yourself a 10-foot wall, you'll find a threat actor with an 11-foot ladder at a certain point. And so I think the difference is that we are both end goal wise looking to maintain a much more robust security posture with multiple layers. And when we're looking at compliance, it really is around specifics around a measurable outcome in that sense, where we're basically able to say, hey, you have very specific criteria. Now, compliance is not necessarily something that is finite either. We are also in a bit of a building the plane while flying the plane, as sometimes we like to say. So when we're looking at those areas, it's really tricky to maintain something forever because those two things are changing at quite a bit. So I think that there needs to almost be an approach of developing a unified strategy to address both cybersecurity and compliance at the same time. If you have really good security measures in place that align with regulatory compliance requirements, then your overall posture for cybersecurity and your overall business health is really good. Now, developing that and aligning to that can be tricky at times. But that would be my initial start to kind of understand when we're looking at it, it's really about the purpose and the focus. When we're looking at cybersecurity, we're looking at a lot of different ways to implement measures to prevent, detect, and respond against cyber threats. Mm-hmm. Compliance adheres to very specific laws, regulations, and standards that are relevant to very specific industries in some cases. So when compliance is in place, it ensures that the organization meets those legal and regulatory standards. And so taking that approach and how we measure, while I think are slightly different, the overall theme and messaging of continually trying to do better and making sure there's lots of layers in terms of protection, in terms of how a business is run, go hand in hand.
So one approach that really allows you to both approach your governance as well as the actual strategic and tactical execution of how you're defending your systems, maybe, in other words?
Yes, exactly. So it's all about risk-based approaching. Looking at conducting regular risk assessments to understand and prioritize those potential threats, tailoring controls to figure out how to implement those security controls based on those threats. Compliance has a lot of things with respect to doing things on a continuing basis for monitoring and improving your security. Even things as when we're talking about employee training and awareness around this, all of it leads into the compliance discussion. And we just have to make sure that those that are working with certain partners, like maybe Aaron or Matt, they're leveraging security tools that meet those standards. So it becomes a win-win.
So, Matt, I'm really curious to hear your perspective here from a threat intelligence point of view. How do you guys differentiate customers that come to you that maybe have kind of, a mixed view of not being able to separate the, you got your compliance chocolate and my security peanut butter?
Yeah, that's a great old callback to a conversation. I've used that before and gotten a lot of confused looks. No, absolutely though. Look, when threat intelligence is a big problem, it's a big event. There's a lot of threat intelligence out there. In my first life, I cut my teeth at the National Security Agency. And, I was raised, if you will, with a very core belief that intelligence has to be actionable and relevant and usable, all of these things that make it intelligence. And with today's threat intelligence space, you could argue it's not really intelligent. It's threat noise or threat information, right? Like not necessarily intelligence. And that was a lot that kind of goes behind, what we try to do with my team and with the Ticura product offering is to, help organizations understand that threat intelligence for organization A isn't the same as the threat intelligence for organization B, for all the things that Pat just said, right? When you conduct that risk-based analysis and you understand what your use case is, your threat landscape is now unique. And there's a common problem, and I know, Aaron, this is going to resonate with you. when clients come to you and you say, hey, I'm a very unique client. I have these specific needs. We're a manufacturing organization that does nonprofit work only in Djibouti and France, right? And you're like, what am I supposed to do with that? And yet the client expects some level of tailoring and white glove service so that they're not getting just the generic information for everybody else. And that's really where we try to come in and say, hey, we can understand that. We're going to parse through what you need and don't need, and then create customized feeds so that then the providers, like an XTIUM that are using our collective resources to provide services to your clients, you can then provide that uniquely tailored, customizable, ingestible, usable threat intelligence feed, right? Because, Aaron, as a threat hunter, even, he can go out there and do the best work, but he can't threat hunt for every single organizational use case. It's an impossibility. And then you add in, AI and the fact that if the good guys are using AI, so are the bad guys, right? So we're all moving at the speed of artificial intelligence, trying to play whack-a-mole, right? So we're using space age technology to play a 100-year-old game at the state fair, right? And that's really the problem. And so by working with other partners and other technology providers, we can really bring a singular, useful, highly weaponized capability to our collective clients.
No, I think that's a great point, Matt. And you touched on something which I think is really important, which is artificial intelligence, right? Because at least in my experience out there in the market, the two conversations that are happening with the highest level of frequency are the security conversation, because that's just universal. I feel like every company always says that our focus is on security. Whether they actually execute on that or not is a little bit of a different story. But also artificial intelligence, right? Probably no surprise to anybody, there's a bit of an AI arms race going. So I'm really curious, Aaron, especially from your perspective in the MDR space, where do you think the AI advantage is these days? Do you think the AI advantage is in the hands of the attackers, in the hands of the defenders, or do you think we're currently at a draw rate?
There's a lot that's still yet to be seen. There's a lot on the defender side that really needs to develop further. There's a lot of opportunities there. The thing that we see most for the attackers is that it's helping them improve operationally. In general, I see the people that already have a lot of skill in running attacks that are then getting that operational and empowerment boost from AI that's then making them better. Because when we look at the attacker landscape, often people are afraid of up-leveling a lot of the low-level skilled people, but I'm actually not seeing as much of that. Some of the times, those people will often misuse these skills. We had one attacker accidentally send us their script for how to run their phishing campaign. And it was definitely generated with something like ChatGPT, where everything had comments, everything was nicely named, but this attacker still really wasn't skilled enough to run this campaign. But we have seen the opposite, where attackers get a hold of data and then they start asking ChatGPT, hey, I have this data, how can I parse it? How can I analyze it? And that's where we're seeing a lot of those advantages for attackers. So back to your question of where's the arms race? I think there's a lot that needs to be done on both sides. So it's really hard to say who's winning and who isn't. There's just a lot of great opportunities out there right now. We see some organizations really taking a hold of them and then others lagging behind, but there's still opportunities out there, and I'm really optimistic about what we can do.
No,
Yeah, if I could jump on that, Kevin, if you don't mind, Aaron, curious to your thoughts on this. One of the perspectives that I'm seeing is that, much like the problem I mentioned with threat intelligence being so much, everybody has AI now, right? Like everybody has access to it. GPT, 4 is free. If you want the next one, you pay a little bit of money for it, right? Or Grok or whatever. So it's basically everybody has it. What I'm seeing is what's coming down to is organizations that are being purposefully mindful in orchestrating their data such that it can be used by AI, and then that the AI can be usefully used by humans, right? Like that's one of the things that we're trying to be in front of. Is it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to use AI to go out and just scour the internet. But if we were to say, hey, we already have our own databases and we're using AI with in our database to do queries and pulls, right? It's one way to kind of turn that table and say, hey, we can at least get a little bit faster. And then if we can get a little bit faster, we can make you a little bit faster, which then makes it's that rising tide that raises all ships kind of mentality is one of the ways that we're trying to address the arms race. We're trying to arm everybody, I guess, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting situation, right? And with that, right? And Matt, I'm glad you brought that up, right? Because it's not just the external influences of AI and the services that are available out there, but there are so many organizations that, as part of this AI arms race, are looking to do their own internal development, leveraging large language models, leveraging the creation of their own AI engines. And in doing so, right, one of the things that tends to mean for an organization is accumulating, storing, and securing a lot more data, right? And to kind of go back to an earlier part of the conversation, we have this convoluted mess of security and compliance that are all tied together. There really aren't, at least, and Pat, I'll come back to you on this. As far as I'm aware, to this point in time, there aren't really any regulatory requirements from a policy perspective yet as to how organizations are storing and manipulating and aging out, retaining all of that data. So from the context of compliance, what do you foresee as the impact of that retention of these massive amounts of data going forward?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see, unfortunately, when it comes to compliance, the good part of it is that we do maintain in these varying ways that we measure a lot of different things, and that it has a standard to build from. That standard does change. It doesn't change probably as fast as the landscape, unfortunately. So to your point, Kevin, there will absolutely be compliance regulations where the SMBs are going to be asked to adopt stricter data protection measures. That's just going to happen. Things like GDPR and others are already doing that. I think that the unfortunate thing is that AI has exploded on the world in a way that we certainly, from a compliance perspective, are aware it's happening. The ways in which we need to standardize against that, because of a lot of the unknowns, is tricky right now. So I think in a lot of ways, having a combination of maintaining a level of compliancy along with a a commitment around cybersecurity, because the private sector in that sense has a much quicker ability to maintain a little more agility against some of this stuff. But they do, as I said before, go really hand in hand. But as far as where we're going to go from here, it is a little bit of a scary prospect at the moment, because the threat actors are getting so good with it. So eventually, this is going to probably fall under some sort of a regulatory. But has it been defined as of yet today? No. I think that all of us are kind of looking at it as a new and obviously very exciting when used well, but equally as scary when used badly. So inevitably, I think that there's going to be other regulatory stuff around this. I also think it could really, frankly, be some of the other factors that are going to drive this are all things that relate to the business, like their cybersecurity insurance. These are things that are going to just be more prevalent because the threats are they're just so good now. So it's scary.
So yeah, I think another example right there of building the plane as we're flying it, right? Like there are regulatory driven organizations that may have a variety of compliance standards that are forced upon them, whether you're in healthcare and it's HIPAA or high trust, or if you're in financial services and it's FINRA or FERPA or FFIEC. They are still trying to figure out on the regulatory side, what does all of this look like. So certainly expect there to be some far-reaching implications as the practical application of some of the technologies around AI get adopted into the workforce. So Matt, if you're okay with that, I'll come back to you. From your perspective, what does the addition of all of that data on the back end look like in terms of the impact to the threat landscape of a customer who's building their own internal AI model? Like, what does that do to their potential threat vectors of attack, or how does that expose them to potential more risk?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably do an entire podcast just on attack surface and risk modeling, right? The trick is that as you amass more data, you're ostensibly doing more with that data, right? Which means there's more things that are coming to the data to touch it, right? So if you think about when we expanded into cloud methodology, we had federated IAM and IDM that became problematic, right? Because in the old days, you had to be on the site, you had to be in the network, you had to have network credentials, and you could kind of control who came and went. Well, then once data started moving into the cloud, well, you could be coming from all kinds of different places. So it was a lot easier to spoof credentials and those kinds of things. Well, now it's, you have these data lakes and data segments and repositories, and you're using, Google Cloud for momentary storage capabilities, and you're spinning VMs up, you're spinning them down. There's nonstop movements of data. How do you guarantee that the data is the data that it was when you put it down, right? So data integrity, it's crazy that we're in 2025 and we're going back to the old NIST CIA model of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? So that's just like the broad philosophy that we're struggling with, but then what do you do with it, right? So again, at Ticura, we're very provincial with, IOCs. That's really our area of focus, is dealing with indicators of compromise. So we are specifically amassing that, where we're scouring, 1,000+ sources. We have, a billion+ IOCs that we're warehousing, so to speak. And then we're using AI to chew through all of that information to create intelligence that's useful on the backside of that. So, we have our own struggles with, we have to ensure that our back end is just as secure, right? Because we have our APIs that are coming and going to all of our partners and our direct clients and our technology adjacent resellers, and there's all these other places where the data is going. But like that's just to simplify it, that's what we're doing, is having to understand who's connecting. It's really going back to the basics, to the table stakes of access management, assuring that the right people are getting access to the things. We're also a little bit different in that we're a pure SaaS model. So we don't have, hundreds of different iterations of our database having to be installed locally in different, on-prem service models. We've actually, we're pretty lucky that we've been able to hold to that SaaS model, because it's so funny. You create a platform and everybody's like, hey, can you be SaaS? And then the minute you create a SaaS model, everybody's like, yeah, but can you put one on-prem for me? It's like everybody wants to change how you're operating. So anyway, I think I might have gone a little far of your question, but that's kind of how we're looking at it.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because I feel like that aligns to the larger conversation, which I would imagine at least some of that apprehension and some of that, users that are looking to maybe pull that stuff back either into on-prem or private cloud versus a SaaS model, likely dovetails with some of their risk aversion, right? There are probably some assumptions in there that, hey, look, SaaS applications are great. In the last few years, we've really decentralized a lot of what we're doing from an application and a data perspective, but we still, at our core, are folks who like to have our finger on the trigger ourselves as to, what our data is, where it resides, and how we're leveraging it. So, Aaron, I'll come back to you with that in mind, right? And I hope these words don't make you cringe when I say them, right? But when I think about MDR, we've talked a lot about threat intelligence and threat analysis, and at least in my opinion, for what it's worth, I feel like a lot of folks in the industry, as providers, as tooling providers, as vendors, as service providers, we all tend to be really good at the M and the D, right? Everybody's really good at the management and the detection, but the response, the recovery, the remediation is really kind of where things are differentiated, right? In the most important area. To me, like, I think about MDR, and there are three other letters that come to mind, and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are when you hear these words, but expedited automated remediation. What does that combination of words mean or not mean to you when you hear that in the context of, like, a customer who's out there looking for a be-all end-all MDR solution?
Yeah. Honestly, it's something that Expel really wants to do, right? And that's been something we've always tried to do, because we recognize that, like, the span that attack takes is shortening ever and ever. Where before, ransomware might take over a month, but now it's over a span of a day, an organization can be compromised. So we've prioritized that type of thing to ensure that we can contain hosts as soon as we identify the incident, disable accounts, and doing those types of things. and wanting to provide that at scale. And a lot of that is because when we talk about things like compliance or security, you really need to measure that and ensure that you actually have that compliance or that security. Because when I've worked in other SOCs in the past, you could definitely tell who the customers are that only have the MDR for compliance reasons, but they never improve their service. They have pen tests that have the same findings every year. And this is really a drain on all the people that are supporting them. But one of the things that Expel has always wanted to do is ensure that our customers are improving. And that's improving against all of those threats so that they can understand where their risks are to improve those so we aren't seeing the same incident day in and day out. And part of that is ensuring that you have that proper response where you're analyzing what's going on in the incident, what was the root cause, what allowed this to happen, where are those gaps in compliance or gaps in security that you can then fill to prevent that from happening again. Um, and yeah, definitely being able to ensure that you have that real response where you're able to clean up the incident, stop the bleeding, and then also identify what needs to happen next.
No, I like that, and Aaron, you're running the risk of becoming a philosopher on us because I hear in there, right? It's not enough. If you're talking to a company about security, it's not enough to talk about the what are you protecting, the how are you using it, but now we need to get into the why are you protecting it too, right? Because if it's just to check the box to say that we have security or to meet whatever baseline regulatory standard there is, okay. I mean, that's not how I would do it, and I'm sure that's probably not how any of the four of us would do it. Certainly not how we would recommend it. But for some organizations, it might be a viable strategy, and we would probably approach those organizations much differently than we would ones who say, yes, I'm worried about compliance, but at the end of the day, I really need to make sure, look, the impact of a breach to me is X dollars and Y lost business, so we can't afford to go down that path.
Yeah, and I imagine it's true for any of you guys when you're working with a customer that really has a vision for, hey, we want to have this security and we want to be able to use your tools and stuff so we can actually be secure and protect ourselves. Those are the customers you really enjoy working with, and your teams will often work a lot more actively with them. Um, which I mean also brings me to one of your questions, Kevin, of like, uh, what do IT leaders need to do to help get that buy-in from other management? Because that's something we definitely see, but I definitely would love to hear from you guys as well, what that looks like for you guys.
I'll jump on it first. That's kind of a near and dear to my heart topic. Um, the biggest thing that I've seen is helping CISOs specifically, right? That's normally the leader that we're working with, and sometimes to a certain extent the CIO, helping them speak in business finance terms. Because a CISO going to the CFO and saying, I need X budget for Y project because Z problem, the CFO's like, what does that have to do with my shareholder value? What does that have to do with my stock price? What does that have to do with forward-leaning earnings, right? Like, how does that affect EBITDA? Like, those are the questions that CFOs want answers to. And so a lot of my career has been helping, like kind of living in that section of the client space and having more business-driven dialogue, right? Where we say, hey, it's not about budget. It's about, spending 1% to protect 99%, right? Or, a genuine ROI. Like we love to throw out, return on investment ROIC numbers, but when we can actually articulate that, that's valuable, right? It's one thing to say, fear and doom, sky's falling, what if, what if, what if, but if we could say, hey, look, let me show you an example. And I'm not going to use client names, but in a specific industry, we had a client, a high profile client have a compromise. Well, everybody in that industry can actually take a little bit of a hit because the industry takes a hit, right? But if you're the one company that can point to your 10K, your 10Q, that you've already war gamed this, you're prepped against it, you did purple teams, you're validated by a third party auditor, you're inoculated, right? Maybe all of your competitors take a hit and you just hold ground. Well, you just actually took market share. Those kind of conversations get a lot of attention in the boardroom. So that's one of the things that I've done. I don't want to eat up all the time, but Pat, you want to?
I would just add to that is that I think that I think all of us here and probably a lot of the audience might be kind of in agreement that it feels like in today's landscape, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And you're gonna probably have an incident. Like, let's just call it what it is. There's been a lot of threat actors that, that make the news, but they also like the ones that are under the radar. They really like to go after some people that really don't have a lot of options. And the reputational damage, your cybersecurity insurance premiums, just overall, business retention, your customers that work with you, if they find out that you're in trouble, they start figuring they're in trouble, and the domino effect is quite bad. And that is also something when it comes to challenges, is that there's a lot of there's a talent gap in terms of understanding what's going to happen after it blows up. And so trying to maintain a team where you can leverage through relationships, maybe perhaps like XTIUM, where I've got teams that I can lean on because I don't really got a guy that knows this stuff. I don't know a guy that really is up to date on all of these new rapid changes that are handling in the market right now. And can I really risk not doing that, and not engaging and not buying into what this is? Because if you look at it, it's as like, oh, this is going to be a lot of expense. Oftentimes we have to look at some of the other key members from the organization that understand from a business perspective what we're risking by not doing something as much as what we are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's somewhere where I've always struggled myself in having security conversations over the last few years with customers is if they haven't already themselves taken an approach to figuring out how to quantify the impact of downtime, the impact of a breach, the impact of loss of reputation, there's a lot of work involved in that, right? So it's not an overnight process of like, yeah, we'll look into that and get back to you with some numbers. And it's not anything that, in my opinion, an outside source can do for you. Now, in my sales career, I've never really been a big fan of FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt-based selling, and you kind of touched on that there, Matt. But the one thing that I found interesting is, in the last year certainly, the boardroom is getting more and more involved in technology conversations, right? And I think there's been a little bit of back and forth in the industry as to like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? If you're a director of IT, you probably see it one way. If you're a CIO, you certainly see it another. But I think back to about a year ago today, right? I was at a cybersecurity event as the testimony in the Change Healthcare breach was happening, and who was it that was called to the stand, right, to give their testimony? It wasn't the systems administrator who left the system vulnerable and exposed. It wasn't the IT director. It was the CEO of the organization. So of course the boardroom's going to be getting more and more invested, especially in these security conversations, because ultimately the buck stops with them, right? There are C-level executive implications of mistakes or misses or vulnerabilities that happen down the stack within the IT team. And again, without it being a FUD-based conversation, I think there are just subtle ways of engaging in that discussion with clients and with prospects that make it a little bit easier for them to internally grease the wheels to get some of those conversations going about what the impacts organizationally are if you don't have these things in place.
Absolutely. Kevin, without going to a long story, I had to walk into an executive's office and basically kick his door in and say, don't sign that SOX 404 attestation unless you want to go to prison. And I got his attention, right? Like he said, come in, close the door, and let's talk.
No, and look, I mean, like, yeah, we can kind of joke about it now because I'm sure we've all seen some pretty crazy things, but I mean, these are real considerations, and it's a very, very different landscape than it was, certainly 20 years ago, but even 10 years ago. You think about the IT landscape of 2015 versus 2025, and that's when a lot of these folks that are in these senior leadership positions were probably down in the trenches. So it's an educational requirement for them to continue to get up to speed on, what the implications of not doing this thing are and what the threats that are facing organizations are in 2025.
I think the other thing, Kevin, that's really great is that while the discussion is always challenging, let's call it that, no one likes to spend a lot of money, but they have to sometimes. A lot of the industries, I just think in the general public and has just a more general awareness of this going on, whether it's in their business or them personally. I frankly got a call last week telling me that I was going to be arrested by a sheriff if I didn't give them a credit card number very soon. And so I think there's certainly a lot more awareness around it publicly, so that when we're having a difficult decision around an upgrade to our security posture where we might want it to ignore that problem, I think now are seeing, to your point, people are being held accountable to it a little more, whether it's in public or just through their own business suffering because of it. I also just laughingly say that if my 93-year-old grandmother knows what ransomware and that type of stuff is, everybody does. So, because believe me, she didn't grow up with any of it. So yeah, I think it's a challenging time, but I think the positive is that more and more organizations are seeing that not only is this a good thing for them to invest in, but while it may be required in some cases, it's ultimately a good thing for them and their business.
Yeah, well, you better get that preemptive bail paid just to make sure that you're able to join us for the follow-up conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Real quick, just show of hands, guys. Like, of the four of us, who within the last 3 weeks or a month has gotten one of the toll notification SMS messages? Right? So 4 for 4, right? So, I mean, this is something that's out there impacting every level of an organization, every level of device, every level of connection. And sadly, I mean, even despite all the technology that's there to protect us, with all the technology the attackers have at their disposal, it's going to continue to get worse. So that said, love to go around the horn, and Aaron, we'll start with you for this one. But in your opinion, in your experience, full editorialization rights, what do you think is really one of the biggest threats that organizations face in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah. So what comes to my mind is when we were talking about AI before, is there's a lot that people try to do on their own. And when we're facing threats, threat actors having AI or those types of things, it always helps when you can team up with other people. And that's one of the benefits, like, I really appreciate from your guys' organizations and mine, that we're able to work with a lot of organizations that might not even have security teams and help up level them, that we're able to give them a lot more of the defenses that they might not already have or augment their existing defenses. And that's what really helps in with those new threats and as threat actors level up. Because just as one example that we've talked a lot about is phishing as a service platforms, where threat actors set up this as a service platform and sell it to threat actors, which up levels all of them. So they basically use it just like we use with any cloud service. They sign up, they pay some money, and then they have all the infrastructure they need to run a campaign. Enables them to bypass MFA, enables them to do a lot of stuff. And the more that we can defend ourselves against some of those threats, which are large scale and further empowering attackers, the better.
So if I can just maybe summarize there. So in your mind, kind of two things, right? So one, the ability to help continue to try to close the skills gap, specifically when it comes into security. And two, just the proliferation and absolute rocket-like takeoff of, phishing with now phishing as a service, which great business model if you're out there looking to start your own small business. might want to be careful about where you operate, but yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that you can go out and buy these attacks pretty much off the shelf these days. So Matt, we'll come to you. So in your opinion, biggest threats 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, so I'm going to springboard on Aaron's, and I agree, but I'm going to be more specific, and I'm going to say time, and then I'm going to explain. So time is the problem. We have less of it, but we have more that's going on in that time, right? Which is, shortening response times, et cetera. Organizations are gauged on things like mean time to respond, mean time to analyze, MTTX, however you want to look at it. And, whether you're measured on it from SLAs internally, OLAs internally, SLAs externally, or it's just the way that you express your value to your organization. Well, the reason it matters is going back to, kind of what I talked about, the vastness of the threat intelligence world. How long does it take an organization to take a chunk of threat intelligence and ingest it, right? Because what happens in most organizations is they throw bodies at it, they chew on it, they're having to rationalize the data, put it in similar, formats. They're getting it from all these different places. It's structured, it's unstructured. And how do you get all of that into your environment in a timely manner, right? And that's a huge problem. And, without being too much of a commercial, that's specifically one of the problems that we try to address in helping organizations consume that data, right? So rather taking 3 days, 4 days, start on Monday, by Friday, you're ingesting a new threat feed. What if you couldn't do it in 6 minutes? Right. That's kind of the difference in the order of magnitude of going from, analog to, I don't want to say quantum because we're not quite there yet. Right. But, the speed of machine learning. And as we try to find more and more ways to do that, that'll get us out in front of all of these phishing as a service bad guys that are out there.
Yeah, quantum is a whole other can of worms, and when that day comes, it's going to make the artificial intelligence arms race look like rocks versus sticks.
Absolutely, your deep fakes and all of that kind of stuff is going to be a huge problem.
Yeah. So Matt, in your opinion, then time is the enemy, and if I can paraphrase, right, there's no good to be had by solving yesterday's problems tomorrow.
No,
right?
No, you got to solve tomorrow's today.
I like it. All right, so Pat, in your opinion and experience, 2025 biggest threat facing companies today?
Yeah, I think that the theme of whether it's the compliance or cybersecurity, from a business perspective, it's really all about, in my opinion, people, processes, and technology. And I think that Aaron and Matt are speaking very much to the other two. I think that what I could really add to is that ultimately, I think that in terms of what you need to be concerned about are all three of them, but certainly your people. I mean, the people that are typing keys, and they can be the key to the kingdom quite easily. And so when we have robust technology and we have really firmed out processes that are great for continuity and incident response and all that all can fall down with your people. And so if you are not educating your employees around cybersecurity best practices and potential threats, you're going to have struggles, because the threat actors are getting so good with the social engineering in terms of getting into networks through looking at people's social media pages and figuring out, oh, this person loves this dog. I bet that's their password. And here we are. They have gotten through, and all of the stuff that like Aaron's teams and Matt's teams have maybe done for that organization, in some ways they just found the back door, and it's the people. So having that discussion, making sure that there's regular training sessions. We do it. Every organization does it. They're not always fun, but they're very, very important. And making sure that they understand the overall importance of why they're doing this. It is not just an exercise to check an HR box that you completed something. It is critical for the infrastructure of the business and their livelihood. So making sure that team is up to date, that they're aware, and they're also aware of what we're doing to make sure that we are, as we talk to our customers out there as a business, we have all of our stuff under control for people, processes, and technology.
Yeah, and maybe reminding them that they have some skin in the game too, because it's their data that is on these systems that are potentially open to compromise, right? Like, it's not just a witch hunt to go out and say like, oh, you failed your phishing test this month. But no, I like that, Pat, and I really like the concept I keep hearing out in the market more and more is hackers or the bad guys and bad girls out there. They're not hacking in anymore. They're logging in, right? Because the people tend to be the weakest link in the chain. And if you compromise the people, then the systems are invalidated because you're basically giving them the keys at that point. So, all right, guys, if you're okay with it, we'll kind of transition one quick lightning round, for today. So, kind of 60 seconds each, and I wanted to lean into each of your areas of specialization. So, Aaron, we'll start with you with Expel. As an MDR provider, what are your thoughts specifically around how best MDR solutions can help on the remediation side of the MDR equation?
I would say it's having a team that has expertise. So, for example, looking at the incident data across our customer base, some customers may see an incident very infrequently, but an MDR provider might see that dozens of times a day across the whole customer base. And it allows a lot of our teams to have that specialties to recognize when something is bad, be able to take quick action on it and offer remediation to clean it up. Being able to identify the root cause, communicating those details, and then providing all that information to the customer so that they can have a clear idea of what's happened, what if there's anything left they need to care about, or if it's all taken care of. And just being able to provide that service 24/7 as well, so that we've got the staffing that maybe other people don't have in-house and that we're able to support them with.
Nice. No, I think that's a great answer, right? So acting as a force multiplier with the experience that you have, just by virtue of exposure, more so than an individual customer can. I feel like that's one of the really big advantages of working with service providers in general. So especially when you're combining service providers with a mix of best of breed security solutions like we have here today, that are part of that service provider's portfolio. I think there are exponential benefits to working in that capacity. So, on that line of thought, Pat, with ControlCase, knowing your background in compliance specifically, curious on your thoughts of how an inheritable control framework, so something like high trust, how does that help a customer organization simplify their approach to compliance?
I think if I'm understanding your question, if you're working with a provider and then you're inheriting some control that they're on top of.
Yep, 100%.
Okay, good. So I think that when we're looking at from a compliancy perspective, if we are a lot of these frameworks align in ways that where business is going to demonstrate compliance through a lot of different things that the provider is giving them, whether it's their endpoint protection, their multi-factor authentication, um, backups, things of all of these things are going to ultimately add to there's a laundry list of things that ultimately tick boxes for regulatory stuff. As somebody is working with a provider that has an expertise around certain disciplines from a technology perspective, they immediately have alignment to something that will ultimately, if they need to get that stamp for a PCI certification, a HIPAA certification, working with an organization that already has tool sets and a background and knowledge base that these tools are not only just going to help the cybersecurity posture in general, but it's also going to maintain them towards something that, let's just be honest, if things go badly, if they are ultimately working with an organization that has inheritance of a lot of great tool sets that tick boxes and then go so far as to help, and those organizations can help facilitate that. If we need to go through a certification or an audit process, it's not an overnight thing. It does take some time. However, if you're working with a team and an organization that at least understands, even if they can't obviously do the actual stamping, but can at least tee you up for a great opportunity to get it as cleanly and quickly as possible, that's wonderful. And then if things are going badly in the event of a cyber incident, having compliance certifications and inheritance tools can really streamline the process. These certifications have been, provided and sort of is saying, look, I'm working with XTIUM. They're awesome. And I've got a tool set where we can document and prove that the business had appropriate security measures in place. There is no, unfortunately, guarantee in life with this type of stuff, but it's going to help them validating and getting through something in a much more smooth process. And the likelihood of those incidents, because you're doing quite a bit to get to those standards, it's really as close as you're going to get.
Yeah, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? And I've had the benefit of I've worked with a lot of healthcare customers over the years, really since the inception and adoption of high trust as a certified security framework. And the way I've always tried to describe it to them, and admittedly, like I'm kind of pulling these numbers out of thin air, but if in a normal HIPAA audit or a high trust audit, you would answer 1,000 questions about different policies and controls you have in your organization. If you can inherit 400 of those and take that 1,000 question audit down to a 600 question audit, man, that's an easy slam dunk. If you're the person who's ultimately on the hook to answer those
questions for you. If you're talking to that healthcare provider and they need PCI compliance because they're taking credit cards on top of that, working with an organization that understands that there's gonna be overlap and there's gonna be inheritance that apply to both. Why do we want to do it twice? So if you can maintain a a relationship with an organization and a certification team where they can actually take the data collected against one discipline and apply it against others that may come up in the future, it's only going to streamline your processes of getting towards that certification that much faster. And again, why do things twice when we can do it once? But you got to align yourself with good people to know that. Unfortunately, I think a lot of your audience is going to have a lot of resources to tap into to make those types of decisions.
Yeah, maybe not a 2-for-1, but a 1.5-for-1 in terms of
because they're not going to be identical. But let's say that we do an overlap and we've covered 45% of it. You know what? Now I'm having a discussion as a business owner where that we often say the auditing or it feels like a 4-letter word sometimes. Like I don't want to do that. I really want to avoid it if I can. And even if I know I need to do it, the intimidation of starting over on another project from scratch is something that some people will just say, I don't even want to get up off the couch to do this now. That last one was rough, or, however it went, just because a lot of the times their expectations going into a certification process can be one thing and it often turns into another. But if you can maintain that core where that team knows both things, and it makes it a lot much easier.
Thank you, Pat.
Yeah.
So, Matt, with Ticura, so we've talked a little bit about threat intelligence, given the amazing work you guys are doing there. For anybody who listens to this or watches in the future who maybe isn't quite as up to speed in some of the modern incarnation of cybersecurity and really what threat intelligence is and how it fits into that bigger picture, if you wouldn't mind, maybe give a quick overview of what your organizational view of threat intelligence is and how an understanding of that can be beneficial for a customer.
Sure. Yeah. Just kind of back up to the simple parts, right? So threat intelligence, when you're talking about, any kind of cybersecurity project, the operation, you have to talk about, again, going back to the old 1900s, the late 1900s, right, with NIST, and they talk about likelihood of occurrence, vulnerabilities, impact of the occurrence happening, right? Are you at risk of this thing, and can this thing get it into your environment? And that's really what threat intelligence is what are the things that pose a threat to your environment? Is it, database softness? Is it logins? Is it, spoofed IDs? It can be so many things that can be a threat to an organization. And then understanding, what does that look like? How does that come into the wire? How does that, if you were talking about a building, what are your threats? It's, it's people breaking in to steal from you. It's people that want to do physical harm to you. It's people that want to, change things in your house. They want to move things. So it's all of those different things that are you're vulnerable to. And that's also why it's important to work with in concert. Threat intelligence can't exist in a vacuum, because there could be, like I mentioned, there's billion plus IOCs floating around in my database. All of those don't apply to XTIUM or to, ControlCase or any individual organization. So you're only going to have a subset that are applicable to you. And that's where the challenge comes in to know, well, how do I know which ones are applicable to me? And then how do I make best use of those ones that are? And what do I do with all of the extra noise so that I don't have false positives? Because that's really where we even talked about false positives. And I think somebody mentioned high fidelity earlier, but that's really where those words come into play. Is a false positive is noise. It's wasted effort, wasted time, wasted money, wasted human resources. And then you've got, high fidelity means you've taken the noise down. So the few alerts that happen really, really matter. And that's where having a well-tuned threat intelligence environment makes an organization better, whether it's internally or externally as a provider to another organization.
I appreciate that, Matt. So one last trip around. We'll just do kind of quick 30 seconds. Any closing thoughts? Pat, we'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, I think the message that I would probably send to the audience is really, when we're talking about the subject, it's complicated, but start having a conversation with somebody about this. It may be that you don't necessarily need to go into a full bore certification because you're a small business that might be needing something. But at least starting with an understanding of a discussion for maybe an assessment, getting the dialogue moving where we can establish some type of consistency around what we're doing, how we're doing it, what we're protecting. clearly understanding those scopes and objections, and then really engaging the stakeholders in the organization to commit to that. And that they're also committed to the idea that this is going to be a continuously improving model. Just because we're here today and we're having this discussion now, if I'm coming back to you as a VCSO and I'm talking to my CEO and I need more money or whatever the case is, this is unfortunately an ever-changing landscape. So that if you're having a discussion and framing it where it's not about money, it's not about expense, it's about continually improving and addressing the concerns that might ultimately be a factor for our business. And when it comes to that type of stuff, it's again just getting the dialogue going. It's something like going to the gym. You got to start somewhere, and you're going to get better and better at it. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but if you work with a trusted partner, have a solid relationship with somebody, they can shepherd you through that. And our teams are obviously going to be available to them as well. So,
How do you eat a cybersecurity elephant one bite at a time?
one bite at a time. That's right. Yep.
Aaron, any closing thoughts from yourself?
I guess what comes to my mind is there's a real way in which security is achievable. When I hear most people talk about security, it's always like the doom and gloom or the FUD type of thing. But when we look at our organizations and we look at the opportunities to get to that place of being secure, there's a lot there. There's a lot organizations can do to ensure that they're not the next name on the front of the paper. So there's a lot that compliance and working with organizations and vendors, whether it's threat intel, there's a lot that can go into that and really empower an organization to be ready for cyber attacks.
Yeah, and I think those two messages go really nicely together, right? Like you can't approach this as an insurmountable obstacle that prevents you from starting down the path, because the only way you're going to get closer to actually achieving some form of prevention or resolution for those issues is to go off on that journey and begin really delving into ways to leverage the tools and services available to you to just start that process. Like the only way to get there is to begin. I think those two things really resonate very well together. So Matt, if you want to bring us home.
Yeah, I was actually going to say one thing, and then I want to tie into what both Pat and Aaron said. So my first thing I was going to say is that we're better together. So where Pat mentioned, trusted advisor or trusted partner, I put an S on the end of that, right? Is, apes together strong, right? Like the bad guys are working together. We've got to work together, and having the right mixture of providers makes an organization better. And then the kind of the bow on top of that, to go with Aaron's point, neither compliance or security is a destination; it's a journey, right? So you're not just compliant or secure. You're as secure as you can be in the moment, and in 30 seconds the moment changes, right? So get good partners, build a good ecosystem, and then be constantly traveling down this path. You got to start the path, but you're never going to get to the end. You're going to make pit stops and stop off for a beer here and there, but you got to keep going. And I think that's really the way to look at this.
Excellent. No, I appreciate that, Matt, and I love that as kind of the final of the closing comments. It's almost like we planned it, but none of us had the foresight to do that for today's conversation. But no, I truly do feel like that better together message should stick, right? And gentlemen, I can't thank you enough, and really genuinely appreciate the time that we spent together today. I feel like it was a really good conversation, and we have the luxury at XTIUM of having this team, right, of leveraging the combination of all of our solutions together to really ideally put our customers in the best possible situation where they get the full coverage that they need from a security perspective, from a compliance perspective, from a threat intelligence perspective, and can leverage all of the deep technical benches that all of us have, all of the expertise that each of our individual companies and teams have, to really act as that force multiplier for them to take the pressure off, right? I feel like it's probably no surprise that IT in general these last few years is constantly asked to do more with less. And it's always more with less. So it's only getting harder out there. And you're faced with that reduction in budget and that reduction in capacity and capability and man hours. Like you said, Matt, we're always fighting against time. while you're also dealing with the ever-increasing threat landscape that our organizations have to protect against. So being able to leverage that expertise of folks such as yourselves, that certainly helps us and puts us in a position to really be able to better help our customers. So again, I really appreciate the time. For those of you who tuned in and listened and or watched, thank you for your time as well. And please keep an eye open, as our next plan at some point in the relative near future is to have a deep dive with Ticura, with ControlCase, and with Expel, all individually, to talk really specifically about how they and we team up with their specific solution set to even further enhance the security solution offerings that we can extend to our customers. So appreciate everybody's time. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, please feel free to reach out. We'll have accompanying contact information that will go along with this on-demand webinar as we circulate it. And appreciate your time, and hope everybody has a great day wherever you are.